Obsession at the Boston Foundation about running these meetings on time. So thank you for your cooperation. I want to welcome everyone here for this very important discussion today. Many of you are very familiar with the Boston Foundation. For those who may not be, however, we are Greater Boston's Community Foundation, a billion-dollar charity devoted to improving life and opportunity in Boston and the region. We've been around for about 102 years. In that time, we've provided more than $1.5 billion of grants, mostly to Boston area nonprofit organizations working in a wide variety of fields, who are happy to say that fully $1 billion of that $1.5 billion has been made just in the last 10 years. So we take very seriously the part of our mission that has to do with enlarging the philanthropic capital that's available to this community, because we know that when Bostonians give money away, very, very good things happen. Even those of you who are familiar with the Boston Foundation find yourself in a different location today. We have moved from the 10th floor to the 3rd floor, and the main motive for that was to have a chance to reconfigure from raw space a design that really makes sense in terms of what the Boston Foundation is today. And a big part of what we are, as you know, is doing things like we're doing today, holding a very large number of forums and convenings on a wide range of issues in the course of a year. What some of you may not know even about that, though, is that another motive we had for moving was to create even more community space. I see representatives of many organizations who've had their meetings at the Boston Foundation. We love to welcome you, and space can be reserved here through our website, tbf.org, and we welcome your participation. We love this place to be filled with active, productive people talking about important issues. I do want to mention that this particular room was made possible by an extraordinary gift from Paul and Sandra Edgerley, and it is the Paul and Sandra Edgerley Center for Civic Leadership. So this is, in a way, really the first major forum that we have had in our new space, and we hope that you enjoy it. We still have columns, to deal with, but fewer obstructed seats than in the past. Before we plunge into today's topic, I also do want to mention the situation in Houston, and I'm sure the mayor will say something about it when he's here. The Boston community is really coming together to provide a tremendous amount of material and financial aid to the devastated city of Houston. We are very involved in it as well through our sister organization, the Greater Houston Community Foundation. And here again on our website, tbf.org, you can find out how to participate in helping with that situation in Texas, and we urge you to do so. And again, I commend the mayor for how active and committed he has been to the besieged people of Houston, and it's really just unbelievable. I also want to give particular thanks to the mayor, who we will be hearing from later in the program. This day, I think, this forum is inconceivable without the extraordinary commitment and leadership that he has exhibited, along with that of our good friend and former Lieutenant Governor of the Commonwealth, Evelyn Murphy, who we will also be hearing from. But we greatly admire Evelyn's leadership in making this possible. Would also like to thank UMass Boston, the McCormack Institute. We'd hoped that Interim Chancellor Barry Mills would be here today, but he was unable to make it. But we thank him and the Institute for their support. The context for this particular contemporary discussion of pay equity really resides in one of the most extraordinary accomplishments of this society in the 20th century, which is the growth of the labor force between 1950 and the year 2000 from 62 million to 141 million workers, propelling the period of greatest economic growth in the history of the country, and arguably of any country in the world. And women joining the workforce, really doubling their participation as part of that upsurge, were crucial participants in an extraordinary period. However, we know that in this century, this young century, These positive trends have reversed, and female participation in the labor force in the United States peaked in 2000 and has been falling ever since. This makes the United States an outlier, as the female share of the labor force in most industrialized countries has continued to rise. The United States once had the 6th highest female labor force participation rate. That was in 1990, and by 2010 we had fallen to 17th place. We think that is very relevant to the issue we're talking about today, but also relevant to the failure to institute opportunities, whether it's in the form of paid family leave or other things that are a matter of course, a matter of fact in other industrialized countries, and that we have not really come to grips with, and we're now really paying a price. And I wish I could tell you that Boston were doing far better than the national averages, but as was noted in the city's 2016 report, women in Boston make 77 cents on the dollar. Now, we can all agree this is a moral issue, a fairness issue, and these numbers are deeply troubling from that perspective. But they also fail to capture the true cost for our city and society when the majority of our workforce is being systematically underpaid. It certainly depresses female participation in the workforce, as I noted. But consider this: 78% of the families living in poverty in Boston are headed by a single female. 78% of the families in poverty, and an enormous percentage of those women are in the workforce. Think what it would mean for them, often living on the margin, to enjoy, if the pay equity matter were to disappear, and they would enjoy a 25 to 30% rise in their wages. So the implications of the situation we find ourselves in are very, very profound and complex, but really call for the kind of sustained action that we're seeing the beginnings of in this event today, and the new information that we have. So again, let me welcome all of you here for this very important discussion. We're going to hear from the mayor when he arrives. So in the meantime, we're going to get going with the presentation of the reports, and I'd like Ann Bookman to come up and take us through that. Ann.
I'm not Ann Bookman. Hi, good afternoon. And thank you, Paul, so much. What a terrific opportunity to join you all in the beautiful city of Boston in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts today, as we all together are working to help Bostonian women flourish. I'm Kim Churches. I am the American Association of University Women CEO, and AUW is very proud of its partnership with the City of Boston and with Mayor Walsh in this endeavor. Now, I may have just joined AUW in June of this year, but we've been leading the charge towards equity for all women and girls since the 1800s. And we've done that through education, policy and advocacy, and fact-based research. You heard Paul speak a bit about the qualitative and quantitative results and what it means right here for the city of Boston and women, but then what that means as you compound it and think about what's happening in cities and states around our nation. The pay gap for women is a pervasive problem that's plagued our workforce for far, far too long. And it affects women of all ages, all races, in every state in our nation. But here in Boston, Mayor Walsh and AUW are committed to changing that paradigm, to closing that gap we hear about year in and year out. And in the Commonwealth, well, I'm very pleased to applaud the bipartisan and unanimous efforts in the Massachusetts legislature, passing a groundbreaking equal pay law just late last year. And they're joined by about 25 other states that are looking at passing similar bipartisan efforts to ensure that we can get to equal pay for all. The leadership of Mayor Walsh and the collective commitment to equity is really best shown through the Boston Work Smart program, the largest initiative in America to close the gender pay gap. And it's a 5-year program to train 85,000 women here in Boston. So today, I want to thank Mayor Walsh, the City of Boston, for their unwavering commitment to arming women with the tools, the skills, and the data they need, And special thanks as well to our friend Megan Costello, who works so tirelessly on behalf of this partnership. My appreciation also to Paul and the team here at the Boston Foundation for their support, ensuring that what we're doing is working. And to the University of Massachusetts, Boston Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy for their comprehensive work and report on this effort that you'll hear about in just a few minutes. Over the next few years, AAUW is very proud to be Boston's partner in achieving the goal of training half of the working women how to get paid what they're worth. And the strategic decision to help close the pay gap for women in Boston is going to provide the roadmap for others to follow. And follow they will at municipal, state, and federal levels. So I want to thank you all today for having us, and we all look forward to the panel discussion and the report's findings. And let me now please invite up Ann Bookman.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to see so many people in the audience who I know who are fighters in this cause. And so I feel that I'm speaking to sisters and brothers where we share many common values. I want to start with a few thank yous. As you can imagine, there are many individuals and organizations that have contributed to this report, and unfortunately, I only have time to mention a few. I want to start by, of course, thanking Paul Grogan, President and CEO of the Boston Foundation. I think it's very important to note that the Boston Foundation didn't just support this report. They provided seed funding to get these workshops off the ground. So thank you for being involved from day one. And thank you to your amazing team, Rose Corcoran, Barbara Hindley, Keith Mahoney, and many others at the Boston Foundation who have really supported our efforts at all stages of the research and the production of this report. Megan, where's Megan? Megan Costello, I want to thank you so much. As most of you in the audience know, she's the director of the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement. And Megan, we thank you for your tireless work and your deep dedication to gender equality. It inspires all of us. And I'm going to ask you to give a message to the mayor. I was going to do a personal thank you, but thank the mayor for seeing women as assets to the Massachusetts economy and for his vision of making Boston the premier city for working women. It makes me proud to be a Bostonian. I also want to thank Kimberly Churches, the new CEO of AUW. As Kimberly said, AUW has been a champion for pay equity and many other issues for decades. And it's very exciting to have a new leader, a new person to collaborate with. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank Evelyn Murphy, who again, many of you know as the president and founder of the Wage Project, as our former lieutenant governor. What you may not know is that she is actually the person who designed the Work Smart curriculum and the Smart Start curriculum. Very, very impressive. Evelyn, you are a pioneer extraordinaire. You are our mentor, our guiding light. So, and finally, I would like to thank two leaders from UMass Boston who have joined us today, who support the work of our center every single day. I'd like to introduce David Cash, Dean of the McCormack Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies, and our Associate Dean, Kiki Ndozi. So thank you, everybody. Okay, now it's time for the glasses. So I would like to provide some context for this report before we share key findings. And I'm going to address three questions. First, how does this research expand our knowledge of pay equity? Second, what is distinctive about this report? And third, what do our findings suggest about finally closing the wage gap? Many studies on the gender-based wage gap are filled with very discouraging statistics about the slow progress to change it and close it. The focus is often on the cause. Is the pay gap due to differences in educational levels or occupational differences or discrimination? And the answer is all of the above and other factors. There are also, but in most studies, researchers have not gone to the women themselves who experience pay inequality. We have. There are also studies on salary negotiation that are critical about using these kind of tools, these skills, to address the wage gap. Some are skeptical, and others actually say it's a blame the victim strategy. They do not believe that women themselves can play an important role in the fight for pay equity. We do. And that brings me to question number 2. This report is distinctive and, as far as we know, unique in its ability to understand the pay gap through the lens of women's experiences. This is the view from the trenches. This is the view from the bottom up. Rather than conducting a survey, we collected and analyzed qualitative data. That is, we gathered and listened to women's stories about how AAUW Work Smart workshops impacted them, not just in terms of their knowledge and skills, but also, and perhaps most importantly, women's ideas about the possibility of getting paid fairly and their own role in driving equity and change. If we had simply conducted a program evaluation rather than a case study, the key question would simply be, did these women get a pay raise after the workshop? And that would have yielded only a yes or no response and missed the deeper story we are telling. This study paints a vivid picture of the complex, nonlinear process of working women learning from each other, taking action, and actually moving the needle on pay equity. At its core, this report is about culture change. It is about how AAUW Work Smart workshops produced a powerful process of change that is growing in Boston on an individual, on a collective, and an institutional level. On an individual level, workshop completers learn to overcome their personal fears about asking for the pay they knew they deserved. They found that lack of self-confidence is a shared phenomenon coming from gender stereotypes passed on by the family, the schools, the media, and with support from other working women they met, they learned to advocate for themselves and pursue many forms of action, often involving coworkers. On a collective level, these women learned they are not alone and that pay discrimination is not due to a personal failure. It is systemic. Or as we used to say in the early days of the women's movement, the personal is political. And yes, they use the E word to describe their workshop experience. Many of them spoke to us about feelings of empowerment post-workshop that catalyzed action when they went back to work. And that's a stunning outcome that cannot be quantified. On an institutional level, this report is distinctive because the women we interviewed are not highly paid professionals, but are representative of working women of diverse backgrounds, many of whom, and I want to emphasize this as I think Paul did, face very serious economic struggles. Their voices are often unheard, but now they speak to us in their own words and describe a transformative experience that will impact not only their pocketbooks and household incomes, but also the policies of their employers and workplaces. So finally, question 3, what do the findings suggest for the future? The workshops have created a safe space for a conversation that has rarely happened. It is usually frowned upon to ask someone, how much money do you make? But in these workshops, not only is that question welcomed, but the answer is, if you feel that you are not making what you deserve, you can take action, you can make change. Through the mayor's initiative, we are having a citywide conversation about gender equality that has become a catalyst for closing the pay gap. These women, workshop completers, are walking the talk. They are becoming change agents in their own workplaces and part of a growing cohort, and this is a very important point, of Boston working women who are also doing the same thing. In fact, we see the workshop conversations as part of a national conversation and a national movement that is growing and including more and more women and men. In closing, at this moment in our nation's history, when the issue of equality and valuing difference has never been more important, we are confident that the story of the AAUW Work Smart workshops contain lessons and hope for the future of a fair and inclusive Boston and many cities and towns across our country. Thank you. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the co-authors of this report who will share more specific findings with you. I'd like to introduce Krista Kelleher, our Research and Policy Director, and Jesse Azang, a Research Associate at the Center. Thank you.
I'd first like to acknowledge two additional members of our research team and ask Amy Bell-Pasht and Priyanka Kabir to stand. Priyanka and Amy, thank you. Priyanka and Amy were essential to this project, and I thank them for their valuable contributions. So, as you've heard from Kim Churches, AUW Work Smart in Boston is a 5-year program. Our study explored the impact of the workshop on women who completed a workshop in the program's initial year. In order to study workshop impact, we addressed some specific questions. What did women learn? What actions did they take after completing a workshop? We were also interested in the barriers that prevented women from addressing their pay in their workplaces and on the job market, as well as the factors that contributed to women's successful salary negotiations. We used a case study approach to answer these questions. Our primary data source was in-depth interviews with 52 women who completed a workshop. We also collected data from the workshop trainers, program staff, and one community partner. We wanted to be sure that our sample was similar to the universe of women who took and completed a workshop in year 1. Our study sample was generally representative of all year 1 program participants for whom demographic data were available. The women we interviewed also generally reflected the demographic composition of the female workforce in the Boston area. As shown in this first graph, nearly 40% of women we interviewed were women of color. The overall racial and ethnic breakdown of our study sample was similar to all year 1 workshop participants and also to the female workforce in the Boston area. The vast majority of the women we interviewed had either a college or master's degree. This was similar to the percentage of all year 1 participants who earned a college or master's degree. However, the women in our study sample had relatively higher levels of education compared to the female workforce in the Boston area. The women we interviewed worked in all sectors of our economy. The table on the left shows that our study sample was more heavily concentrated in the nonprofit sector than is the female workforce in the Boston area. Now I will discuss what women took away from the workshops. The workshops provided women with knowledge as well as specific tools and skills. Women cited 3 learnings that they felt were particularly useful. 1, how to determine their professional value by using the best available online tools. 2, the importance of making the ask for a pay increase. And 3, what some women called conversation strategies, or having the language. That is, phrases and terms that were most effective to use during a pay negotiation. In addition, many women noted the importance of focusing on their strengths when considering their value and potential. In this way, the workshop encouraged women to take an assets-based approach. Finally, women learned how to develop a step-by-step plan for asking for a pay increase. Beyond these specific learnings, what we want to emphasize here is not just the content of what women learned, but the process that took place inside the workshops. Women told us over and over again that they found it incredibly valuable to learn from other women from different backgrounds who worked in a range of industries and sectors. This collective experience enhanced all of the particular knowledge women gained from the workshops. This is an important finding in and of itself. Another key finding is that workshop completers took a range of actions after the workshop that included, but went far beyond using salary negotiation skills. As you can see, and you might see a little bit better in the printed report if you can't see it here, this graph lists 9 actions. I'm going to highlight 3 of them. First, nearly half of the women, 48%, used newly gained skills to negotiate a pay raise in their current job or a starting salary in a new position. This is a much higher percentage than we expected. Second, the workshops jump-started dialogue about pay, a sensitive and often difficult topic to discuss. These informal conversations took place both inside and outside workplaces. And third, a large majority referred other women to the workshop, including coworkers, friends, and family members. 6 out of 10 women said they signed up for the workshop to prepare for looking for a new job. It turned out that 44% of our sample were either on the job market or seeking a promotion following the workshop. And they applied what they learned in 2 important ways. First, a majority of these women, 61%, took action during the interview and hiring process by deflecting questions about either past pay levels or the salary they wanted in a new job. And second, 52% used skills they learned in the workshop to negotiate their starting salary in a new position. Jessie will now talk more in depth about the actions women took post-workshop.
So I will talk on a number of factors regarding the actions that women took, what facilitated some of these actions, and what barriers they face in the course of taking some of these actions. And so with regards to facilitating factors, what did we learn from interviews with women about their post-workshop actions? We wanted to know what it was about the workshops that led so many women, almost half the sample, to act to address their pay, either by securing a pay increase or a higher starting salary. We found from women's accounts that their actions were catalyzed by a number of factors, as you can see there. I would like to elaborate on 3 of these findings and offer a reflection from one of our study participants. First, women drew on a range of supportive resources in the work setting, such as approachable and encouraging supervisors. Secondly, when we look outside the workplace setting, we found that women often drew support from families and friends, as well as their professional networks. Third, women told us that the workshops resulted in an increased sense of self-confidence. This was a critical factor in their taking steps to negotiate their pay. Now, I would like to share how one woman documented her accomplishments on the job, resulting in feeling more confident about her professional value. She, in turn, negotiated a pay increase. And this is what she said. I think part of the negotiation process is being confident in what you do and what you bring to an organization. I bring something to the table, so I think I definitely have used that skill of being confident in knowing yourself and your skills. This woman's account exemplifies how the workshop resulted in a shift in confidence and increased sense of professional worth for so many in our study. With regards to barriers, we also wanted to know what it was that hindered women from actually taking actions, not only to increase their pay, but to actually also negotiate a higher starting salary. Clearly, our study documented an array of post-workshop actions and many successful pay increase attempts. But this presentation, again, as you're noting, would not be complete without talking about these barriers, as efforts to address one's pay were not always easy and did not always end in success. Women certainly faced barriers, including both external and internal factors. And this made it challenging for women to take steps to increase their pay. And several of the main external factors are listed here, as you can see on the slides. And using women's own words would provide a better sense of what they entail. One woman addressed the issue of institutional power dynamics in the way she described the salary negotiation process as a game. And she saw it, or the way she puts it is, the house always wins. Like it is a game in which the house always wins. And the house wins by relying on women's insecurities to negotiate them down. Those are her words. So many women cited the financial constraints of their employers as well as a barrier to increasing a pay, to securing a pay increase. This was especially the case for women working in the nonprofit sector. And another example of how someone from the nonprofit sector puts it is, for people who run nonprofits, the pet answer is, we just don't have the money. We don't have it. So in terms of internal factors, many women talked about their fear of being perceived as too aggressive and subsequently disliked by their current or future employer. We also saw instances where some women said they were concerned about being turned down for a raise or being labeled as greedy. So it's important to note that the internal and external factors identified by women are interactive and influence each other. They do not operate in isolation, and one may be more significant than another at different times. So with regards to the workshop impact and outcomes, how we saw this. So our data makes a strong case for the significant impact of these workshops for three primary reasons. First, AAUW Work Smart in Boston workshops provide a supportive space for women of diverse backgrounds to develop a shared understanding of the wage gap and how to negotiate for pay increases. Women spoke over and over again about how powerful it was to learn with other women in this collective and interactive environment. Secondly, women took their new knowledge and skills back to their workplaces and engaged in a range of actions, as you've seen, as discussed by Krista. Yet the story does not end with individual pay increases. If we only looked at pay, we would be losing much of the story about the impact of the workshops. Women were eager to share what they learned, have their friends and colleagues take the workshop, and be an advocate and support to other women. And finally, women recognize that they are not alone in their struggle for increased professional value and equal pay. It was empowering for them to realize that the wage gap was not a personal, but rather a systematic problem. Their accounts reflected a sense of agency that came from not only getting information and tools, but from feeling supported by others. So most women walk into these workshops as individuals hoping to equip themselves with information and tools to increase their own pay. Many left the workshop feeling they were part of a collective, that is, a cohort of workshop completers who together could create positive change in workplaces across Boston and help achieve pay equity for all women. So the actions they took and the transformative experiences they relate to us reflect both personal and collective empowerment. So year one of AAUW Work Smart in Boston was incredibly impactful. So we look forward to learning about its ongoing role in helping to close the wage gap in the city of Boston in the years to come. So I would like to turn things over to Evelyn Murphy, founder and president of the Wage Gap Project, who will serve as our moderator for today. Thank you.
Okay, let me ask the panel to come up here, and we will start a panel discussion among us, and then after a couple minutes, we will open it up to everyone for questions that you might have. Before I do that, I have to say, in listening to this presentation, research is not just a thing out there. It's not just a study that you sort of pitch. It's really interwoven with the people who ask for it and create it, and with the people who then have to use it. And it's the strength of that connection between research and the people that are involved with this that is so unique in this situation. The mayor's not here, but I have to tell you, just to step back for a minute, nice things have been said about me. I've really been a one-trick pony for the last dozen years. I've done nothing but the wage gap and pay equity. And I have to enough. We started doing these workshops throughout the country, and now the AUW has picked it up and taken it to another wonderful level. But in the 49 states that we were in, I have to tell you that there is no mayor in the country that has taken on this agenda with this scale and with this conviction. It's just, we get these headlines. We know the mayor because we see him standing out in front of City Hall saying this is a city of immigrants and we're going to protect immigrants. And we see him helping and inspiring all of us to help the people in Texas. But but pay equity, you don't get these headlines. You don't get the front page headlines. You don't get the sort of the all over the social media, because pay equity has been around for so long. And so therefore we don't pay as much attention to what's going on. This has been 4 years in the making. Mayor Walsh, I had an initial conversation with Mayor Walsh and with Megan when he first started in office. The conviction this man has had is not just to do this and to say we're going to treat women equally and pay women fairly, but it's also that he's put the resources. Megan Costello worries about this every single day. She's been the driving force of this every single day. That it takes the resources as well as the statements. I am proud of what we're doing in Boston because the political force is so strong and so real that we can pull it off here. But we can't pull it off unless you have the philanthropic support as well. And Paul Grogan and the Boston Foundation have been at this, as Ann noted, since the beginning, starting some of the funding, helping to fund the initial workshops, and now this research is the first research on this workshop, and variations of which have gone on for about 8 years. This is the first time we've known how good it is, and how sophisticated and how complicated it is. So now we're going to get into, and by the way, and Ann Bookman is the brilliant researcher who's been, if we didn't have this caliber of researcher who's been so experienced putting this together in all of its complexity, that wouldn't happen either. So I hope you all come out of here realizing we have a nucleus of people here today that are both the input to this, and now you're going to hear from this panel, which has been deeply involved with it as well. We have going for us right now something that is so extraordinary. And with all of you in this room, we can continue this in a way that'll be so powerful that we really will show the nation what it's like to take this work, this pay gap, and do something dramatic about it. So now we want to hear from the people who are deeply involved in on the day-to-day level. And because you've heard so much from Ann and her colleagues, it occurs to me that I'd like each one of the panelists to sort of take from your perspective. Megan is involved with the day-to-day leadership of the Boston Women's Workforce Council, which is dealing with employers, as well as what we've done with the legislature. From your perspective, as well as what Jeff Schwartz is Morgan Stanley has been the provider of a major number of facilitators. So he, as an employer, has encouraged his employees, his workers, to go out there, the women to go out and become facilitators. He's got that input and that perspective. Christina Desir has been the day-to-day maker of these workshops. She's the connector between the sponsoring organizations, and the facilitators and the people who come. She puts all this together with some kind of chemistry that is just magnificent. And Benny Francisco has a way of looking at this from a Latina's perspective and to see what it takes, not just in providing space, because she and her organization have provided space for these workshops, but also what it's like to use this workshop in a way that represents all women of all races and all backgrounds. So I want to kick this off, and Megan, I'll ask you, and then I'll ask all of you sort of more spontaneously. Out of all you've read and thought about in this workshop, what is the most important lesson here from your perspective?
Great. Thanks, Evelyn. And thank you again to the Boston Foundation and Kim and AUW and Anne and her team. As Evelyn said, we started this work a few years ago, and you hope things work. You do a lot of work to make it happen, but you never know really where things will end up. And we are delighted to be here today and delighted to see the biggest impact that I think, which is really these workshops work. You think about the gender wage gap, and legislation is certainly an important component to closing the wage gap. We know that we need safeguards in place so that women can eliminate the salary history question or can have some transparency in their salaries. But we know that this goes beyond legislation, that this is about social norms. This is about social behavior. This is about cultural changes that need to happen. And I think that this report, this case study, really shows us that this is having an impact, not only in terms of the actual compensation that women are getting and asking for, but in terms of the sense of community that we are building. And I think it really complements the work that the mayor and I are doing, and Evelyn and the Boston Women's Workforce Council, who I know Mary Rose and Annalisa are here as well, with employers. We now have 216 employers in Boston that are working on their side of things to ask from an employer perspective, what should I be doing? So I think this combination of the salary negotiation workshops, individual women, we know that as women we are terrific advocates for everybody except ourselves. So individual women taking control of their careers and what they want to get out of them, the work with employers on reporting wage data and employers asking themselves, what can I do? And the work with the legislation, which Jill Ashton and so many others in this room, I look around this room and there's a lot of active faces here that worked so hard. This is really, I think, what is going to put not only Boston on the map, but it's really going to change the lives of working women here in Boston.
Jeff, okay. Tell us what stood out for you.
So I want to take you back a couple of years ago. Evelyn, in her typical self-effacing way, came to visit me in my office. and she brought sort of this idea. There was no PowerPoint, there were no charts. It was just simple. And she presented to me an idea around these workshops. And she'd been doing them for a long time, but with a different constituent, more college-age women, and said, would the private sector be interested if we actually began to deliver these workshops out in the community? And I looked at her with this sort of wry smile and said, well, Evelyn, the private sector would most definitely be interested, but my guess is you're asking the question, would Morgan Stanley be interested? And without hesitation, the answer was yes. The answer was unquestionably. But before I could really do that, I wanted to go observe one of these workshops. So I went to UMass Lowell one evening and just watched and observed. And for anybody that is dubious, read the research. The research was wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed reading the report. And it validates all the things that you've heard today. But let's be real for a moment. It's year one. It's just the beginning. We need to do a lot more. So what's most important from my perspective, from the experiences that I've had personally and as an employer in the city, is that we need to double down. We need to do a lot more than we're doing right now.
Awesome. I think these workshops are really impactful and powerful in terms of letting women know their professional value and really knowing what they bring to the table overall. And I think the most important thing that I saw from the study was that women supporting other women, whether it's sharing their workbooks or recommending their friends to take the workshop overall, or supporting other women in achieving pay equity, which is so amazing and shows this Boston community is so terrific. And it's not just about themselves, but also helping others, whether it's in the form of being a supervisor or a mentor. This community of 5,000 women, I mean, Megan and I talk to a lot of these folks on a regular basis, is terrific, and we're so proud to be part of this.
So thanks for having me here today. The way I got involved with these workshops was actually through the Boston Women's Commission. And when Megan first announced this partnership that the mayor's office had with AAUW, I was immediately interested in bringing these to our Latina group. I co-founded a group called the Latina Circle, which is working to advance Latina leaders into positions of power and influence. And one of the other studies we had just presented to our group was the color of wealth. And it was the study around the wealth gap in Boston, which disproportionately affects the Latino population. And so what better workshop to bring than this one to begin to teach women how to talk about pay, how to begin to articulate their worth. And we actually hosted our first workshop here at the Boston Foundation, and it was done in partnership with other Latino groups like Be Visible, Conexión. And one of the things that stood out for me in particular across the multiple workshops we've hosted is that for Latinas, this is not a common conversation, right? Culturally, it is very difficult to talk not just about your pay, but also to talk about money itself and to talk about wealth and wanting more of it. And what the workshop immediately does, as part of it, we talk about the cultural piece first, because that's really important, where you feel that you can't even begin to get past your own limitations, right? So I think that's the biggest piece that stood out for me, that in the study, so many women felt that they had that safe space, that they could feel that they can learn from other women, because that hasn't really happened. You may complain with your friends, but you feel like you don't have those tools, and that's what this workshop really provided. And just beyond the actual training and giving the tools, it really was a confidence an empowerment building workshop, and they actually work. Even for me, I mean, I'm a lawyer by training and I negotiate all the time, but for me, what stood out is that I thought about, did I negotiate in my first job and my second job? Probably not. I don't think I did. But this created a forum for me to say, we must do this. We must teach more women to do this. And also the women that have come to our workshops, we make it a point to tell them that they must also bring this to others. So they become facilitators, and we're working to continue to push that.
So did anything surprise you, Betty, in this workshop?
Well, actually, I wish more women negotiated. So the 48% that, as a result, did negotiate after the workshop, I wish that number got higher. Because I think the tools are great, but it still shows us that there's difficulty in having the conversation. And I think that if we can keep building on that and creating spaces where women can practice and can talk about, how do I articulate my worth? How do I showcase my experiences? How do I better position myself, especially as you get more senior? How do I do that in a way that really creates advancement for me? That, I think, is going to keep moving the needle.
Other surprises?
I think that's where the 87%, I think, was the number in the report, of 87% of women took some sort of action, which I think is the first step in when we're trying to think about negotiations. Whether that action was doing the research, for the first time maybe talking to a friend or colleague about it. You know, these workshops, I always say, they're not going to change your life in these 2 hours, but they are designed to make you think differently about your career and what you want to get out of it. And what are your talking points about yourself? I'm in politics, so I was thinking talking points. What's your value to an organization? And how do you articulate that value? And then how do you make sure you do the research to understand where you fall? I mean, we have a challenge in the United States where we don't have pay transparency, where we do still have, you know, the salary history question that's allowed to ask. So these workshops are one factor in how we can help women negotiate. And you know, 48% is not 100%, but 48% of them were successful, right, in negotiating either higher compensation or compensation for a new job. And so that's very significant. And if you think about the scale that we're trying to get to, so we've trained about 5,000 women so far, and our scale is hopefully 85,000 by the year 2021. That's half of Boston's workforce, female workforce. That's about impact.
Any other surprises? What else pops out?
I think for me the surprise was perhaps less about the workshop, maybe directly to your question, Evelyn, but more about the actual statistics. And you know, as Paul mentioned at the outset, the 77% is staggering to me, and that's just, it's unacceptable. And so I think we start with the discussion of, okay, what do we plan to do about it? And then the second piece that I would offer is I think in a short time we actually have a model. I think what has been done, and the research supports this now, is that we need to be careful that we don't change too much of what we're doing because the model works. It's about now further reinforcing it. And so in some of the discussions we've had is what else should we be doing? And it's my humble opinion that we need to continue supporting these workshops. They're powerful. If you haven't attended one, attend one, and you'll see and hear about the anecdotes in particular. I love the anecdotes in the research. So to me, those were the surprises.
Mm-hmm. Christina, do you have any surprises?
I think it was really interesting to see that they all walked out confident, which was not really surprising, but 90% actually started having conversations about their salary, which is the first step. And this is what we're trying to get folks more comfortable speaking about it, because everyone has different industries, different jobs, but at least starting to think about their value and knowing what they bring to the table is essential. And that's what we're trying to encourage folks in these workshops. And I think that's what surprised me the most, that 90% immediately started to think about these things.
Uh-huh. You know, in the report, once you've read this, you'll see at the end a lot of recommendations for implementing. And I guess, again, to Jeff's point about be careful how we move on this, I'd be interested in your thoughts about what stands out in the implementation, what needs to happen next? Where do we improve this workshop, but how do we do it in a way that doesn't overload it or so distract it with other things? It may tailor it, may improve it, whatever, but there are lots of recommendations there around implementation now, and give us some thoughts about that.
I'll start there. I think that I said at the beginning, this report shows that these workshops work, which is the case, certainly. But that doesn't mean that we don't have areas of improvement or places that we want to even dig a little bit deeper in. I think scaling is what keeps me up at night. Getting to the 85,000 number is certainly a bit daunting. Kim and I have talked about how we're going to do that here in Boston. And I think it really relies on our community partners. One of the things that you will see in the report, but hasn't been that much talked about today, is the Latina circles, the Young Black Women's Society, the YWCAs that have hosted these workshops for us, that have active members as part of their community, and they are hosted these workshops. We provide a facilitator. So more of that is going to be important. Building relationships with more community partners is important, but also identifying community partners that have hosted workshops for us and having them commit to doing it consistently. General Assembly down in downtown Boston hosted a workshop for us in August, a Tuesday night in August, and they had 73 women there. And they're doing this once a month. And the reason they're getting such a higher turnout than some of our other workshops is because it's becoming a known, consistent time and date every month. So more community partners that are consistently doing this. I think another thing that's really important to me and important to the mayor is reaching out to more women of color. 52% of the women that live in Boston are women of color. We have about 40% women of color trained, which is reflective of the workforce here in Boston, which is great. But we can do better. We can do even more. And so we're going to be very intentional, and we already have been in year 2, about reaching out to organizations that represent women of color. Those are a couple of things.
I'd offer a couple of things. One, this whole public-private partnership, I think, is critical to future success. So Megan and Mary Rose and so many others have been working tirelessly on really recruiting the private sector to march together in this. And so it's my view that everybody has a vested interest in the outcome. And so the public-private partnership is so critical to our success going forward. Secondly, if I remember the statistic correctly, 71% of those who completed a workshop actually referred a friend or a colleague to the workshop. We need to capitalize on that much greater. I mean, that's a huge opportunity to get to that 85,000 number. And then lastly, in the interest of time, I know I'm repetitive, but the instructor-led workshops work. To be able to bring people together in a community setting is powerful.
Yeah, I think that me and Megan talk about this a lot. continuing with our neighborhood strategy and offering these workshops in every neighborhood, because not every woman works downtown. We want to make sure these workshops are accessible, and we've been doing that. We want to continue to do that, but also cultivating new relationships with faith-based communities or communities of color organizations, so that more women of color can have access to these workshops and we can increase those numbers. So I think those are the main recommendations I think that we can work on in the next 3 years to making sure we hit that 85,000 number, and 50% of those numbers are women of color. So I think that's something Megan and I have been working really hard on.
I would agree with all the recommendations. In addition to boosting the community-based workshops, it's also getting more women to become facilitators, because once they do it, they're immediately the role models and the mentors to so many of the women that are participating. And once you have one, it continues to build. So I think creating more impetus for facilitators to actually go through the training and to continue doing advanced training, I think will be important. The other piece is for some of the women that have participated in the training already, they're asking for part 2. They're asking for the advanced version. So I think there's also room to add another layer to the conversation so that we can continue getting perhaps more senior women or women as they're rising, because the conversation around pay and how you negotiate starts to become a little different.
Yeah, and to that point, Betty, that's one of the things that we have really thought a little bit about in year 2 is not only providing the workshop space and people make connections at those, but then at least once a quarter our goal is to host networking events where it's not about the workshop, but it's about coming together from people who have participated from different industries, from different backgrounds, to not only maybe make connections for new opportunities for yourself, but also to share your experiences. And again, it goes back to creating this culture and community of women that are really supporting one another in this.
So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to open this up for the panel, but I'm going to let the mayor sit if he wants to. Oh, what timing. Let's take a couple questions from the audience, and then I'll invite the mayor up here, but we'll give him a chance to catch his breath and get into the spirit of things. Yes, there's a question over here.
Thank you. My name is Lionel, and I'm here representing Mattapan Tech, which is a nonprofit organization in Mattapan, and I love the discussion. And I have to say, I think this is more of a statement than a question. I have to say that I wish I knew at the beginning of my career that I could negotiate my salary. Because that first job out of college, those first couple of jobs, I was just excited to get the job, and I would have taken anything anybody had offered me. So that's the number one statement. And it seems to me in your report, it seemed that a number of the women, so a couple of statements, a number of the women either had a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. So I'm curious about the age group of the women that were in the study. And my third statement is that I'm saying I'm part of Mattapan Tech. I'm just on the board, but I work full-time for the Department of Revenue in their child support division, and I'm in a union, so I don't negotiate my salary. There's a bargaining unit that tells me what my salary is alongside the 500 other people that I work along with. And so that's just, any comments on that? That's it.
Yeah, I'll dive in on that one. So on the union point, I mean, I think that this is where unions are really important, right? Because if you're in a union, you're getting paid the same. What we do need to think about is what unions are dominated by female compared to male, right? And the compensation that exists there. So that's certainly a conversation that we can have, and it does make it a challenge for actually these negotiation workshops, right, and applying some of the skills. But that doesn't mean you still can't understand what your value is, understand what your market rate is, and still use some of these conversations in professional development opportunities. I think the other piece of this really is around going back to the neighborhoods, right? And Christina talked a lot about this. We have had a number of workshops. We've had one in every single neighborhood at least, but we do really need to make sure that we want to hit this 85,000 number, but it's a balance of, do we just do stuff downtown and really get 100 women to turn out at one workshop, or are we going out to the neighborhoods where we might get 15 people, at the Mattapan Library, or 25 folks at the community center in Dorchester. So that's another important component of what we're doing and finding that balance.
Okay, I'm going to, if you hold the questions for a couple minutes, because the mayor's come, I don't want to be respectful of his time. We've said a lot of wonderful things about this mayor in his absence, so so you're coming to a friendly crowd. But please welcome our leader in the nation on this issue, Mayor Marty Walsh.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. I'm not going to go too long because I know you didn't come here to hear me speak. I'm way late, and I apologize for that. I was at a DACA press conference today, and I'm fired up, and I need a crowd to get pissed off at. When I say I'm fired up, I look at this White House. And everything they do, they're nothing but a pack of bullies in there. That's the best way I can describe it. Jeff Sessions, who doesn't have a clue. There was a young woman who spoke, Diane, she spoke. She's a DACA young person. She went to Harvard, she graduated. She was talking today at the press conference without a note. She went on for 5 minutes. She talked about learning American history. She talked about loving this country. She talked about the importance of getting a Social Security number. She talked about the importance of paying taxes. She talked about all of that, brought to this country at the age of 6 years old by her mother from Mexico. She said this is her country, and I was listening to her, and as she was talking, I was getting angry, and I thought to myself, she probably knows more about American history than Jeff Sessions ever could, and he's the Attorney General, and we know that she knows more than Donald Trump knows about American history. So, and I don't mean to be that way, but I am angry today, it's just unfortunate. This flag on my lapel represents something. And when I think about every time I look at a flag now, and I think what's under that flag is us, and I think about how the rest of the world is perceiving us today, and what we are doing to some of our own people, which are women, what we're doing to our immigrants, what we're doing to our Muslims, what we're doing to our refugees, and I think about that, and it's sad. It's a sad state, and this guy has 3 years left, and I can't wait for the next presidential election to come around, because I'm going to work morning, noon, and night to get him out of there, because the damage he's done. But today is something that's important. The conversation that you're having. This conversation started for us 2 years ago in City Hall with Megan Costello and Evelyn and a bunch of other people. I want to thank you all for that. And at that time, 2 years ago, that was an important conversation about salary negotiation. I probably couldn't stand on the stage 2 years ago and say, 2 years from now, it's even going to be more important than it was 2 years ago. But it is more important than it was 2 years ago, because we have a government that doesn't appreciate people. When I say that, I'm talking about the United States Congress, United States Senate, where they can't agree on any type of anything. And it's unfortunate. So what you're doing today and what's been done here today, and it's been done over the last bunch of years, I want to say thank you. Let me get my thank yous out of the way. Thank you, Evelyn Murphy. Evelyn Murphy has been incredible. I know she's moderating the panel, but she has absolutely been incredible, and she's been doing this work for a long, long time. And I'm so glad. We had a conversation a couple weeks ago at night, and I'm so glad that she decided to kind of do more as far as out in the public, and she has been a terrific mentor, not just to Megan, but to me. And I want to thank you for that, for your great work. I want to thank the Boston Foundation. I want to thank Paul and everyone here at the Boston Foundation. Early supporters very early on, getting right involved, jumping in both feet, not even asking questions. I want to thank Heath Mahoney as well. Different role when we started this conversation, and I want to thank you for that. Ann Bookman, thank you. Kimberly Churches, thank you. AAUW, thank you. The Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy, thank you. Christina, Betty, Jeff, thank you. Megan Costello, thank you. YWCA, 2 years ago, we started this conversation. Thank you. We talked about making this the best city in the country for working women. That's what we talked about. It was a bold idea. We talked about free salary negotiations and helping women negotiate their salaries. Thank you for the question on labor, because that was one of the things we talked about earlier. We don't have to worry about labor when we talk about this, because the men and women get paid the same. But how do we do that? What Megan talked about later is the second part of salary negotiations. Is there an opportunity for us to get more women on boards and commissions and in powerful positions? That's what Megan was talking about when it comes to labor. Can we get more women at the leadership ranks of labor? Because 2/3 of the people that are union members today are women and people of color. So clearly we need more people, more women and people of color in leadership positions for labor today. We set out a program for 5 years. We're on track to meet our goal. I'm going fast because you don't need to come here to hear me speak. The negotiation workshops are awesome. I live with 2 women. And I would not want Lauren, who is in law school now, I would not want her to walk into a job and be sitting apart from her counterpart, a male, and think that because he's a man, he should get paid more than her. Because I'm watching her do her homework, I'm watching her read her books, I'm watching her study, and she's working as hard, if not harder, than any man is to become a lawyer in Massachusetts. And I think it's important for us to remember that and make sure we continue these great opportunities to create these workshops and continue the work. Thank you, Boston Foundation. I know I have a message here somewhere to say, but I'm not gonna. I want to thank you. Seriously, I want to thank everyone who's going to speak today. I want to thank anyone in this room who just came to a workshop. I hope you got something out of it. I've had the chance to come to a couple little workshops and watch some of the folks that have gone through the workshop and talk about how great it is. This is about you. This is about making sure truly we are an equal city. We have a lot of challenges, as I said. We had a lot of challenges before January of 2018, 17, 18, right? 18, 17. We had a lot of challenges before that, but now we have challenges, but we have all of the right people in the right places. What I mean by that, I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about all the people that are in positions of power, whether it's City Hall or positions that are making a difference in people's lives. Again, thank you to everyone coming here today. The last thing I'll say is, God bless you. I am frustrated today. I'm frustrated today because I know that school starts on Thursday in Boston. And I'm going to go around to a bunch of schools on Thursday, and I'm going to see little kids walking into school that are going to be afraid. Those same little kids were afraid. Back when this guy got elected president back in November. The dreamers that are older understand what's going on, and they can fight for themselves, and they can protest and rally down in D.C. and we'll stand with them, and they can rally and protest in City Hall Plaza and we'll stand with them. But what bothers me is that these 2 guys today are picking on little kids who are afraid, that don't understand what's going on. All they know is that their life is completely turned upside down today, potentially. And we just got to let them know, reinforce the idea that we stand with them every single step along the way to make sure they feel safe in Boston, just like we stand beside every single woman in our city until we truly see equal pay for equal work across the board and see women in positions of power that they should be. We're not going to stop that work until we're done there. So thank you very much.
I think we've all now seen why we have such respect as well as affection for you, Marty. This is a man who fights for all of us. And you get these occasions where the reality of the day steps into a scheduled event, and you see this man's passion and his fight, and it just gets to me. So thank you for what you do here with us today, but in the larger context, thanks for fighting for us every day. The mayor has to leave. The mayor's going to leave in a few minutes, so please understand that he's off to do some more advocacy and fighting. But we'll continue with some of the questions that I had a chance. I saw some hands over here. Yes.
My name is Ann Moritz, and the mayor has just added, with his DACA Dreamer example, to all of those who have been through the workshop. I sense that they have been acquiring skills for the folks who are not in the room, the folks who are managing these houses, the folks who are fostering an ongoing culture that these women in the workforce must now go back and buck up against. Fantasize for me for a moment about how we can use the skills of the women who have been through these workshops to turn around and facilitate trainings for the house, for the people who are in charge and managing the culture that is not changing fast enough.
Oof. Who wants to take that one?
I mean, so that's the one.
Fearless Megan.
That's what we're doing through the Boston Women's Workforce Council. We have 216, if that's right, Mary Rose, maybe it's 17 now, employers that we're working with, including Morgan Stanley and other large companies here in Boston, State Street, Mass Mutual, that are acknowledging employers have a role to play in creating equal pay. And it's not only the right thing to do, I think that this is an important distinction. You know, equal pay, it's 2017, we should hopefully all agree that women should be paid equally, right? But this is also about businesses' bottom line. And if you want to retain your workforce, if you want to see a happier, more productive workforce, then you should be paying women equally. It's that simple. And so we're really excited about this combination that we have here in Boston with the legislation that will be implemented in July. It's very special. We have these workshops, so we're talking about training individual women and making sure that they have the tools that they need to be successful. But then we're also talking about employers and what can employers do. At the end of this month, September 29th, we're bringing together over 200 employers to say, from your perspective, not just what are the buzzwords, not just what are sort of, what's the data on the surface level telling us, but what's actually happening in the culture of your workplace, and what are you as an employer doing to create a culture where women feel welcomed, where women feel supported, and where you're paying women equally.
Let me add to that for a minute, because I am the co-chair of this Boston Women's Workforce Council that involves employers in this effort. If you think about it for a minute, every working woman in Boston could go to a workshop and understand what her worth is and how to negotiate and do it brilliantly. But if her employer decides that he or she is not going to go along with this, then she's constantly going to be struggling and fighting. On the other side, if every employer said, I believe I'm going to pay my women and my men fairly, equitably, but if women on the other side don't understand what their value is, then they're always going to think their employer is deceiving them. So you need both sides of this equation. That's why this Boston model of the Workforce Council and these workshops is such a brilliant piece of initiative. And yet, as that co-chair, I will tell you, I would urge every person in this room today to go get your employer to sign on, to become a signer to this compact. This is not easy going. We don't have employers rushing in the door to hold up their hands and say they want to do this. So it's one by one, and every single one of you today could play a very important role in doubling this number from 215 or 16 to 400 plus. It would be huge. So take that message as well as the workshops. Ann Bookman, you want to mention something about the study?
Yes, I just want to, I don't know if this is on, but I just want to make a linkage.
You want to stand up and turn around?
Yeah. I just want to make a linkage between the employers and the women who went through the workshop. One finding that we had that we didn't share in detail is the number of women who said, now that I've been through this workshop and I understand my own work, I'm interested in becoming a supervisor. I'm interested in starting my own business. So this culture change process we talked about is, I'm trying to make a linkage between women's leadership and what they learn in the workshop. So it's not just that they're
increasing their pay and fighting for other women, but they're really thinking about taking new kinds of positions of leadership in the private sector in their companies. So that is another example of culture change that I think could be very powerful.
Okay, other questions?
Another thing that
Yes,
happens in
Betty.
workshops, to the extent that the women who participate are hiring managers, they're also
now realizing that they're perpetuating the gap by doing certain things, right? So asking what your salary is, or not even nudging somebody to negotiate. So now so many of the women say, now I ask the other women to negotiate, and I nudge them, and I say I won't continue having a conversation unless you negotiate with me. So I think it's starting to create that change, but it's as a result of having participated in the workshops too.
Super. Other questions? What's on people's minds? Yes, we've got a whole bunch over here. Sure.
My name is Chelsea, and I was a workshop participant. It was either last fall or summer. And I'm also going to be starting at the Center for Women in Public Policy at UMass Boston tomorrow.
Whoa.
For me, the workshop was a great success. Just to give some context for my question, in fact, the hiring manager for the next job I got had also taken the workshop, like you just said, and I was also able to give some of the language I learned to a friend who was able to negotiate for a higher salary. However, I also had a friend who wasn't as successful and in fact faced some backlash, I guess, from the powers that be. So my question is twofold. One, any advice for women who do kind of go in with newfound confidence, employing the things they learned and do face the negative consequences at work? And two, you talked a little bit about institutional change for like big companies and corporations, but any plans to reach out to nonprofits who I think struggle sometimes with not only, sometimes the pay is equal, but in hiring very overqualified women to fill certain positions. So could you speak to that?
Sure. Who'd like to take that? Christina.
I'm trying to remember the question. It was a lot.
You want me to take it?
You could take it.
Just from an employer's perspective, I guess I would offer two things, and perhaps some of it's based on the industry that I'm in. If there was backlash, I'd question whether I really want to work at that company, okay? Because I think that's probably a little bit more of a preview into the culture of that organization. And then secondly, again, just my own, and I've hired a lot of people and negotiated a lot of pay through the years. I welcome the discussion because it leads to healthy discussion and it leads to a better relationship. So maybe it goes back to the first part, which is a question whether that's the right place for that person.
I think also you mentioned about working in the nonprofit sector and how the challenges are with negotiating overall because of not having enough resources. And I think that there's always a challenge in that place. And I know the Workforce Council is working on recruiting more folks from the nonprofit sector, but also I think looking for more organizations that do offer more pay. They are out there. And so it's about searching and also figuring out the balance between staying at an organization for their mission versus pay. And it's always challenging in that sense, but I think finding the bottom line will be the easiest thing.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to that. The backlash piece is real. It's something we talk about in the workshops. It's something that, I think women fear, right? Like this is the anxiety that exists, right? It comes true. So how do we deal with that? And it's really around acknowledging that unconscious bias exists. And I always say to women, at any point during a negotiation, whether it's for a promotion within your organization or whether it's with a company that you're looking to work for, you can always stop. And you can just say, I've really appreciated, the conversation. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I'd love to revisit this conversation in a few weeks. So if you ever sort of feel like, I don't know what to say next, I'm unsure, I'm feeling anxious, just take a moment and pause and revisit it. And I think that that's something that's very powerful about the workshops. In addition to the nonprofit stuff, compensation and what we think we should be getting is obviously something that we're talking about today, but it's also about the benefits, right? What other benefits? I know free parking, right, in Boston, that's a huge benefit that we might be able to negotiate for. So just because a company or an organization might say to you, well, we can't compensate you at this because of limited resources, can they give you another week of vacation? Can they give you free parking? Other benefits like that is an important part of what we teach.
Now we have to be careful about when we say nonprofit, it's an umbrella for a large number of entities, some of which are huge. Some of our healthcare providers are nonprofits, and then you have the small nonprofits. So we need to be careful because the larger ones do pay fairly competitive salaries. Yes, will you hold until we get the microphone to you, since we are recording this?
Thank you. Thank you so much for talking about this. I think about my mother and my grandmother and how silenced we've been about talking about money as a culture and especially as women.
Yes.
My name is Julianne Otis, and I coach executives on their relationships with money, with the myths of scarcity, and with sustainable abundance. I'm so touched by this conversation. And I'd like to know, if you're willing to be transparent, would you tell us what you pay your facilitators? If you pay the women facilitators the same as men, and if it's all women, if you pay those women the same as what you would pay an outside male consultant to come in and coach people on the same topic. And if you don't pay your female facilitators or any of the facilitators, why you choose not to pay them.
I think that's a very fair question. So, I think when we think about the recommendations of where do we take these workshops next and what are we doing, right now we do rely on volunteer facilitators. And I think every woman in this room can think of a job that they do on a volunteer basis because they believe in a cause or a mission. And so we certainly do rely on women in our community to do that. But it's certainly something that Kim and I can talk about, thanks to your question.
Great question. Yes, we have a question over here. I'm sorry, this woman up here has been very patient. Yes.
Two very patient people.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you to everyone. I actually am a facilitator as a volunteer, and it is worthwhile, not just for the work, but also in, no, not just in the work that I do with others, but also in my professional life. So facilitating has also helped me to facilitate at my current job. So it's been worthwhile on many levels. Christina and I have talked about cultural differences, and I know that's come up a little bit. And it's very different depending on where you grew up, who your parents were, family members. My household, we didn't talk about that. My parents said don't accrue debt, but they didn't say this is what you do when you go out into the world and negotiate your salary. I would love to see the workshop move to high school seniors, maybe have a bring your child, whether it's a male or a female child, to a workshop so that you can talk about these things. I had a family member say to me, an uncle, I love him, but he said to me, well, why is that important, when I told him that I was doing this work? So we need to talk to family members about it, but also as a woman, I'm so focused on pushing my career forward, doing work like this. You kind of forget sometimes that you need to focus on your children as well so that they're also empowered and not starting behind the 8 ball. So it's kind of a comment and a question about next steps.
Thank you for doing these workshops.
Yeah.
Anybody want to respond to that?
On the cultural side, so in the workshops Latina Circle has hosted, we do pose the question of, what are the cultural barriers to negotiating your pay? Because that is the first step to actually having the conversation. And what you hear a lot of the women talk about is that, your initial comment before was, I didn't know that I could even negotiate, or it feels, in my culture, you have to be humble and it's just disrespectful to ask about it. And I think there was one comment where someone said, I feel actually bad asking for more when my mother, I know how much my mother makes, and for me to make triple that feels bad. And those are real feelings, right? To say, I don't know how to talk about this. I feel badly about it. And we counter that with, well, what if you could have more money and the difference that would make in you providing for your family, or being able to buy a car, a house, save for retirement. And it's just when you start to pose it in terms of economic security and upward mobility, it just immediately changes the conversation to say that that's okay to want that. We need to have that. So the cultural piece is super important to weave in, because If you don't, and you just talk about it as just, here's a training on how to do it, it doesn't get down into those deep feelings of self-worth. And that, I think, is one of the most powerful things about this workshop, is that it helps you actually talk about your worth and what you bring to the table. And you can't do that without first acknowledging the barriers to that. So thank you.
Kim.
One, I wanted to thank you for also raising high school seniors and for thinking about what this means for various levels of educational attainment. I grew up believing that education is the great equalizer, and that we all know that the more you attain, the more you can earn. But AUW, just a couple months ago, put out a report called Deeper in Debt, looking at student loans and how they perversely affect women as they seek higher education. And I bring that up because, to your point on high school seniors, those who perhaps have achieved their GED, those who have taken maybe some community college classes but haven't achieved their AA, those who perhaps chose a for-profit university and are just compounding debt upon debt upon debt, but not able to complete their degree because of caretaking and other needs. So what happens there is the gap becomes the ultimate alligator teeth that just keeps chomping and widening out, and that can't be okay. So as we're looking at AUW on our work on these programs and why this partnership is so key, it's not just about, as we saw in the report, about people who've achieved a bachelor's degree or a graduate degree. Certainly that's key and very important as we think about leadership roles in our private sector, public sector, and in government, and making sure that women are represented. But we have to make sure, if we're going to get to the inequities that we're facing here in Boston, in Massachusetts, and in this nation, that are only getting worse in the city that I live in Washington, D.C., by what's happening right now, we're going to need to make sure that these programs are offered to those that are at a high school level, that are in VOTEC, et cetera, and make sure that every woman has an opportunity to earn the salary they deserve. Thanks.
Oh, there it is. It's on.
It is. It's hot. Hi, my name is Julia Geisman, and my whole focus is gender equality and equity. So one of the things I have noticed is that there are a number of women who drop out, who take a pause to raise their children. And in doing so, what has happened is they forgot, and this addresses your comment, Kim, they forgot that when they drop out or when they take a pause, they do put themselves in a very a vulnerable position financially. And so one of the things that I endeavor to do when I work with women is to talk about how to retain one's relevance because of the financial investment they made and time investment they made in their education. So perhaps another phase could be geared towards those women who have decided to raise some children, which is a very, very important aspect to be sure that our civilization endures. But on the other hand, they, in serving the civilization, they also put themselves at risk. So I would offer up the possibility of looking at that segment. I live in Charlestown, and they have a mothers association of 17 strong, 1,700 strong, not 17, 1,700 strong. That's a significant number of women.
Yep.
So that's my comment.
It's a great idea.
Well, and I think, Julia, just to build off that point, Julia is also one of our fabulous facilitators, so thank you for your work. This is why our office, the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement, is also looking at this from a variety of angles. We have to ask ourselves the question of why do more women leave the workforce compared to men too, right? Why is childcare so expensive, and why is it so difficult to find information about childcare? So there's a number of things that don't necessarily directly impact the wage gap, but do impact the wage gap that we also have to take into consideration when we're talking about this issue.
Points. Yes.
Hi.
Hello. Hi, I'm Maya Sharfi. I run a empowerment boot camp for women in creative fields. So I teach negotiation and I teach a lot of these skills. I've been doing it for the past few years, and one of the things that started to come to mind in the last year or so that I can't get out of my mind is that perhaps I'm spending my energy in the wrong place. Perhaps it shouldn't just be about me and you training women, but what about the men? So one of the things I'm thinking about is, yes, I need to negotiate, women need to negotiate, but men can play a role in encouraging women to negotiate. Men can play a role at looking at who they mentor and whether those people who they're mentoring look like them and remind them of their young selves. Men can play a role in thinking about who gets access to opportunities that are highly visible, a recommendation to, to fill this next important role, a recommendation to speak. I don't know how many people have seen the website. Congratulations, you have an allmalepanel.com, but these things happen over and over. There's all kinds of soft power. And I just wonder, should we be having workshops that train men who want to be allies? Okay, step 1, do this. Step 2, do that. Step 3, let's take your good intentions and put them into reality.
Terrific, terrific. Anybody want to?
The good guy on the panel? No, I mean, I think this is something the mayor and I talk a lot about. I always joke with him, there's nothing you can do about being a white guy from Dorchester, right? But you can be an ally. You can recognize the power that you have and make sure that you are very intentional in this space. I use this, Michelle Obama used this a lot, talked about amplification, talked a lot about, okay, when we're sitting at a table together and all the men are doing the talking, how do I lift up other women's voices as a woman, but also what role can men play? I think it's very, very important. It's certainly, I always say too, if it were just up to women, we would have done it hundreds of years ago, right? So we need men to be supporters and allies and advocates in this work as well.
Okay, nice. Am I missing people back there that are behind the pole, or? Yes.
I am one of the co-founders of a startup called She Geeks Out, and we are actually a community partner, and we were really honored to help support this, and we are strong supporters of gender equality in all aspects. And I just wanted to address the woman who just spoke. So we actually have a webinar next week on how to be an ally, and as part of Hub Week, I will be facilitating and moderating a panel on how to be an ally in the workplace. So there are organizations out there that are actually doing exactly what you mentioned, trying to get men involved in the conversation as well, because it can't just be one group talking about how to fix things, it has to be all of us together. So thank you.
Okay, let me take just a couple more questions. I must say, I'm stunned by this. I mean, the breadth of this is just fascinating. There's a woman here, yes.
Hello, my name is Shonda Lewis. I'm from Strong Women, Strong Girls. I actually have a question around the age breakdown of the participants in the workshops, and if you saw a difference based on, the lines between generations, about how receptive they were to the information that was being presented, and then also the implementation of strategies that were being taught. Just interested.
Great question.
So I think that, it's important to, I think it's important to say, and I actually think it's a plus, that the majority of the workshop takers and completers were 44 years or younger. Not that older women are not being underpaid as well, and very important to take the workshops, but I think when we're talking about a culture change here, which we are, that the millennial generation and the high school girls and the boys and the younger generation are incredibly important. I wouldn't say that we saw, and I would say also that about 50% of the workshop completers were between 18 and 29, 36% were between 30 and 44. So you can see it was a very young sample. But I would not say that we saw differences in the way that people were absorbing the information. I think there were differences in terms of how much workplace experience people had had and how many disappointing experiences people had had. And in that way, I think that was part of the empowerment process, was really
hearing each other and what people had tried to do, and finally feeling like there would be a breakthrough with new language and new scenarios and new online resources and so on.
Okay, I'll take one more, and then I think we ought to be wrapping up. We got a final question here? Then I will invite Paul Grogan to come up and close us out. And thank you once again, Paul, for hosting this.
Well, thank you, Evelyn, and thank all of you, all the participants, all the hard work that has gone into bringing us to this moment of opportunity. Speaking for the foundation, I can't imagine a worthier subject for one of our first forums in our new space, and we're just so delighted to have hosted all of you today. But as a number of people mentioned, we have been deeply involved in the project from the beginning. It is very, very compelling on its own. But as I said in my earlier remarks, it also connects to some fundamental issues in the workforce that are going to determine whether we're going to be a society of opportunity going forward or not. The decline in the labor force participation of women is a disaster if it continues. It cannot. In that is an opportunity, it seems to me, to forward this agenda, because women are going to be so needed to meet the workforce needs that will be presented to the country. So this is a big topic, one that connects to a lot of other topics, and that's why the Boston Foundation's going to stick with it. Thanks again.